And we're starting a little light and breezy with his statements about climate change whilst chatting with Joe Rogan. After confusing weather with climate and claiming the words climate and environment are meaningless and all that, Rogan asks him to clarify about what errors in the climate models he means specifically. And Peterson starts by saying,
look, imagine that you're going to predict how your life goes.
And then Peterson goes on for, no exaggeration, 6 minutes about how climate modeling is wrong because of the vague idea that things in general in your life are hard to predict. During this, no exaggeration, 6 minutes, he talks about how predictions get more difficult in the future, saying you can game it out by offering someone $5 today or $5 1 month from now, and how some people are more impulsive than others. He then moves on to the tale of the ant and the grasshopper fiddling all summer and the winter comes and he dies. But the ant, well, the ant stored up and prepared, and so it survived. But what if the grasshopper was in 1923 Germany and there was hyperinflation? Well, in that case, the grasshopper's doing fine. At one point, he talks about this classic example, as he calls it, of a chicken and some farmer. The chicken gets used to getting fed every day and thinks everything's fine. But then one day, it's dinner time. The chicken had a theory, but there was a massive flaw in the chicken's plan. So you just can't predict the future, you know? Climate models and such. I really can't stress how I'm not making up any of this. And Rogan, bless his heart, I guess, really gives it his all. And
that makes sense when you're talking about chickens and farmers. But
Yeah.
when you're talking about human beings and
so we could
CO2...
play a future. Well,
And then Peterson continues to talk about whether or not you want $5 today or $5 in a month. And then the grasshopper thing. Again, nearly 6 minutes. And I feel like we can just end the video here, you know? The man is ridiculous and clearly talking in mythical shaman speak in order to push his ideology. But he does eventually get to the semblance of a smidgen of a qualification as to why he can talk so confidently about this stuff that he is wrong about. Yes, after he was corrected by all the scientists for his extremely wrong things that he said, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson clapped back on Twitter by pointing out that he, quote, served for 2 years on a Canadian subcommittee on sustainable development for the UN Secretary General. It's something he mentions as a credential anytime he's about to say something wrong about climate change.
I worked on the UN committee that wrote the Secretary General's report on sustainable development. I worked on the Canadian subcommittee, to be technically accurate. I worked for a UN committee for 2 years on sustainable economic and ecological development and read a very large amount during that period of time and learned a lot.
Wow, what a fancy chair. I bet he's a serious man. And it is actually true that he served on that subcommittee, in that he was one of some advisors to one of the chairpeople on the subcommittee, specifically James Lawrence Balsillie, who is the co-founder of BlackBerry. And this is unimportant, who in 2006 tried to buy the NHL's Pittsburgh Penguins and move them to Hamilton, Ontario. And in 2007 tried to buy the Nashville Predators and move them to Hamilton, Ontario. And in 2009 tried to purchase the Phoenix Coyotes and move them to Hamilton, Ontario. And in 2011 was rumored to try to buy the Buffalo Sabres and presumably move them to Hamilton, Ontario. And in an unspecified year was rumored to try to buy the Atlanta Thrashers before they were bought by somebody else and move to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Again, unimportant, but this is all to say that while I'm sure Dr. Jordan B. Peterson helped research and edit James Lawrence Balsillie's contribution to this subcommittee, it could be argued that his general experience doesn't give a lot of weight to him saying the climate models are wrong, and also that there's nothing we can do about it. And maybe he didn't have a particularly pivotal role on this subcommittee, but he sure likes to pretend that he did in order to say stuff like this.
First of all, it's very difficult to separate the science from the politics. And second, even if the claims, the more radical claims, are true, we have no idea what to do about it. And so, no.
So he worked on this subcommittee and read a lot of books, and his conclusion is that even if the extreme predictions of climate change are true, we just don't know what to do about it. Which is funny because the report put out by this aforementioned subcommittee that he worked on and uses as his qualification actually very specifically proposes things we can do about climate change. And we'll get back to that. But also, this one subcommittee isn't the only organization or person who's put forth many ideas of what to do about it. And Peterson's complaint seems to just be like, it's hard to pick one idea or do a bunch of ideas. The genius, order, and responsibility guys like, But the point is that I guess Jordan read a lot of books, so he must know better.
I can't read physics papers in physics journals. I'm not mathematically gifted. And so there are all sorts of scientific and mathematical claims that I can't evaluate.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Seems then like maybe you shouldn't go on a really big platform and speak confidently about concepts you admittedly can't grasp, especially when your position is in direct opposition of people who specifically do grasp those concepts. Speaking of all those books Peterson's read, another thing Peterson did when called out by actual climate experts for his word salad was to respond with what was basically a fake news CNN tweet before posting a single book as his proof that his gibberish was in fact correct. That book? Hot Talk, Cold Science, Global Warming's Unfinished Debate by S. Fred Singer, the founder of a climate skeptic advocacy group partially funded by a think tank that's partially funded by ExxonMobil. Nice work, Jorbson. Way to show up decades of climate science by skimming a single book and rambling on about a chicken and a grasshopper in 1923 Germany. It feels like we're going in big, frustrating circles here, which, spoilers, isn't going to be a rare occurrence. And so I guess that brings us back to the question as to why this guy, who sure appears to be a dip about climate change science in more than several ways, is being allowed to talk so confidently about climate change to such a large audience despite being such a silly man. Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.